Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Angela Brown. I currently work at Corby Technical School in Northamptonshire. I've been working recently on the benefits of combining language methods and interpretation to analyse texts, trying to avoid the pitfalls of feature spotting. So this, the first of two sessions today, is on exploring textual attractors in unseen poetry analysis that can be applied to both GCSE and A-level English. The resources for this presentation and for the presentation later on can be downloadable after the event. So apologies for my rather awful alliteration here, but here is my recipe for scrummy stylistics. So my method is take a poem, read it and enjoy it. So immerse yourself in it. Bring your own background knowledge, mix it thoroughly, and then think about the messages. And then take your textual attractors, explore what stands out to you, and finally find patterns and add to your enjoyment of the poem. I've just put on some secondary sources on this slide. So the main theory I'm looking at really is schema theory, which is advocated by Christine Council. She came and did a training session for our trust, which was absolutely amazing, on looking at how sort of schema can build a narrative for texts. There's a reference there to her blog, and then Stockwell at the top there, who looks at the idea of textual attractors. Also with thanks to Marguerite Perrin and Graham Leach, who I used to work with many years ago, and they started me on this unseen poetry journey. And the poem that I'm going to use, or the extract from the poem that I'm going to use today, is one that we used to teach together. So first of all then, the importance of schema. A definition of schema here is a bundle of knowledge about a person, concept or event. And that very short definition comes from one of the language and literature textbooks by Giovanelli et al. There's a quotation here from Christine Council that says, "All I'm talking about here are schemata. Cognitive psychology has long established that we only have a tiny window of attention through which to attend to new material, but armed with multiple subsurface associations from prior knowledge, we rapidly assimilate and interpret the new. A narrative is just an intensification of this process." So I'm going to talk a bit more about how to build a narrative around unseen poetry analysis. But also looking at this idea of schema, drawing upon a bundle of knowledge that you might have or students might have about the world. So the visual image here is the actual object is a bird. So if you're a student, you would know a bird is that thing that flies through the sky. It's got a beak, it's got wings, it may have talons, it may have feathers, etc., etc., etc. So when they can then apply that schematic knowledge to texts that they're studying, for example, something that in poetry that might be actually much more abstract. For example, in the poem Poppies, which is on the GCSE AQA syllabus, where that symbolic imagery of letting a bird go and seeing it fly up into the sky is used in the poem, where so hopefully a very simple example here, the students will then bring to bear prior knowledge, the idea of feeling free, or the bird might be feeling free because it can fly away. British psychologist Bartlett proposed that people have schemata. And he said that they are unconscious mental structures that represent an individual's generic knowledge about the world. It is through schemata that old knowledge influences new information. So the idea is for unseen poetry is to draw on that old knowledge, that cultural capital that students might have, and then bring it to bear on the new information that comes from the text. So the first thing that we do with this recipe for textual analysis is we get the bigger picture. I want to sort of learn from the pointillists, who were an artistic movement that engaged in dot dabbing in order to build a picture. So here we have a system of dots. It could represent, for example, the way a student first sees a poem. It may well be a confusing jumble of words, because poetry is something that looks different to other forms that students might be more familiar with. So imagine these are the words. So what students, the temptation is here is for students to say, well, I recognise that orange dot there, that's a metaphor. I'm going to pick on that and I'm going to look at that, because I know that I get assessed on my ability to analyse language. So they zoom in on that one particular feature and end up feature spotting. So the best way to do this is to then step away, to step back and look for patterns. So here we have the full picture. The picture is Seurat's afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte. I'm sure I've not pronounced that very well, so I apologise. So in this picture, we can see that when you step back, you get the bigger picture. You're not getting entangled in the kind of the technical structure of the poem. You're actually standing back and saying, what is the narrative here? What is the story? And you look for patterns, and the patterns that you find come from the overall impression that you get. So you end up thinking about sort of, you know, the beauty of the poem rather than getting tied up in the language analysis. So in order to get the bigger picture, I do something very simple. I'm sure you do something very similar. Is I just get students to analyse the W questions, which is a very low stakes way of students finding the way into a poem. They may not be able to answer all of them. That's absolutely fine. I have a mantra that I have in my classes, which is it doesn't matter what you don't know, just write about what you do. One of the key things that they do need to start considering, though, and they can get that often from the exam question too, is why might this poem be written? So the last W question there is the why, what the message is of this poem. So again, this is easy questions to get the students into the poetry, which I'm sure people use all the time anyway. I then extend that a little bit further. So I've got the text here. Which is an extract from Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot. The poem is actually 50 lines long. I did it for A-level. And here we have the first 8. So you can see here there are certain things that might trip a student up or might get them kind of enmeshed in those dots and that sort of, you know, the fineness of the language before they understand the meaning. So we immerse ourselves in the text. So I'm just going to read it to you. As for a student, I would normally expect them to read it twice before they start doing too much analysis, again just to immerse themselves in it. Here let us stand, close by the cathedral. Here let us wait. Are we drawn by danger? Is it the knowledge of safety that draws our feet towards the cathedral? What danger can be for us, the poor women of Canterbury? What tribulation with which we are not already familiar? There is no danger for us, and there is no safety in the cathedral. Some presage of an act which our eyes are compelled to witness has forced our feet towards the cathedral. We are forced to bear witness. Now, for anybody that's studied T.S. Eliot or knows a little bit about the history of Canterbury, may well know that this is the place, and the act is referring to the murder of Thomas Becket. But of course, students in the unseen kind of situation won't know that, so they need to work with what they've got. So my instinct here is to get students to ask questions. Again, this keeps it low stakes, and they ask those questions themselves. So it's a move on from the W questions. So they may well, in the W of questions, have said, well, it's about poor women. It's set in Canterbury. It's near a cathedral. It's really, really simple answers. Now we get them to start questioning what they've already found. So what do I know about cathedrals? Do I know anything about Canterbury? And this is drawing on that cultural capital, that background or that schematic knowledge that they may have. And for some students, this may well be quite thin. So, I mean, I was born near Canterbury, so I know about Canterbury. But students who are, you know, in the north of the country might not know. So by asking these questions, they can bring to bear some very simple answers. So, for example, with the idea of Canterbury, it's a place. It's a place, it's got a cathedral in it. There's women there. So they're starting to build this kind of narrative approach. So the other issue that students might have is looking at the vocabulary. So you can see with the red here, what I've done is I've substituted slightly more colloquial terms for the words that they might find difficult that you've got in the boxes on the side here. So it's about getting students to think about the word in the context, but trying to substitute that. So you could do this as a teacher yourself, or you could get students to think about, well, what if you took that word out, what would you put it back in its place? So here I've put for tribulation, what real bad luck. And the word forced, I've substituted out compelled and put forced in because it's a synonym of the verb forced anyway. So I'm hoping, you know, again, students may well get that. So get students to, where they've got vocabulary they're not sure about, get them to look at it and say, well, what could I put in its place? It's not foolproof, but it might help. If you're teaching this, you can then just do that and then revert back to the words again within the context, so they now know that tribulation means what real bad luck. Okay, so I'm just coming to the end of this session. I've got another session to complete where we look at this poem, this part of the poem, in a bit more detail. And we start to think about those textual attractors, those things that stand out to us. For the time being, all we've done so far is drawn on schematic knowledge in order to you know, allow students to bring whatever background knowledge they can to a text that they won't have seen before. So they're stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. So thank you from part one, and I hope that you can tune into part two very soon.